Can you hear me now? Yeah, I can even hear myself. So I can kind of move around in this space. Okay, because I move around a lot. My name is Marlene Zepeda. We're going to be focusing today on book reading, and I'm going to give you an example of book reading that has what we call an English language development approach. This is the idea of having children who don't speak English learn certain key concepts, phrases that they will then transfer over into English. But before I do that, I'm going to give you some background to try to give you the theoretical frameworks for why we are doing this kind of practice. But before I start, let me just get a sense of who everybody is, because when I looked at the list, there weren't, how many people are TK teachers? Okay. How about the rest of you? What are you up to? I'm sorry, what? CPEN lead? Preschool? College faculty? Nonprofit? LACO Head Start? Okay, yeah, and I kind of did, when I went through it, I said, hey, I don't have a whole bunch of teachers so much in here as I have other support personnel. But actually, support personnel, you can carry the gospel out to your other teachers. The description of the workshop said I was going to talk about myths of bilingualism. I'm not going to talk about myths of bilingualism. If we started talking about myths of bilingualism, we'd be here all day. Some of that may come up in the discussion. If you're interested in myths on bilingualism, you all received a resource list in your handouts. And there is a seminal paper by Linda Espinosa that was published by the Foundation for Child Development that talks about myths of bilingualism. And I actually use that even with parents who are considering putting their children in dual immersion programs, because one of the most common myths is that the children get mixed up and they get confused. And one of the reasons not to be in a dual immersion program or a bilingual program is because the children will be confused. And that is completely inaccurate. Language mixing or language or code switching, which it is often called, is a very normal activity for young dual language learners. And in fact, I would argue it's an intelligent behavior. Because what is the main reason children learn language, in your estimation? Why do children need to learn language? To get their needs met. Okay? They will use whatever means at their disposal to get their needs met. And if that means going up and pulling on your pants or pulling on your blouse, or as my younger daughter used to do to me, she used to get her hands and put them like this. Look at me, stop multitasking, okay? So language is a tool for children to get their needs met, to communicate their needs, and to engage with the world and learn about the world. So I just want to let you know that I'm not going to be talking about myths. And in fact, when I was preparing it, I looked at the description like the day before and I went, oh shoot, I'm supposed to be talking about myths, but I'm not. Okay, but if you're interested, I would urge you to look at that particular paper. So I want to start off with a video clip. And this video clip is available online on YouTube. And it's from an organization or nonprofit organization called Teach from the Beginning. And I'm going to be showing you a couple of clips, if you haven't seen it, about second language acquisition. That I was involved with the development of this material.
ძალიან ხმაურია და საერთოდ არ შემიძლია. აი ნახე, კომბლე ხო დაჯდა, ძალიან ზარმაცი არის. და შენ გგონია? აბა რომელია კომბლე? მითხარი? ეს არის თუ
Imagine that it is your first day of school
არიცი, ხო არა?
with new surroundings,
მაშინ ესე
new
იგი
people,
გავაგრძელოთ
and a new
საქართველოს
language.
ვისაუბროთ თუ გინდათ ცოტათი. ძალიან მიხარია რომ მოხვედით დღეს. ძალიან მადლობა. იმიტომ რომ აღარ გელოდით. ეხლა ჩვენ აი ამ წიგნს ვათვალიერებთ, ხო? საცოდავად შეჰკნავა, გაიგეთ? ესე იგი მეო მივდივარო, იქიდან წამოვედიო და მე ისე ვიქ წავედი. მოდი, მოისეს, შენ მითხარი აბა, როგორ არის ჩვენი ძროხა? არიცოდი მოისეს? ტრიშა, ხედავ მელია ძროხას? აბა მითხარი მელია ძროხა? ხო და ნახე, აი შეხედე შენც? ხო, არ ვიცი მე საიდან უნდა მოვიდეს ეს. არც ეხლა გჯერათ რომ მე უძლეველი ვარ. ხომ ხედავთ? დენიელ, შენ იცი რა არის მელია ძროხა? ესე იგი მელია ძროხა არიცი რა არის დენიელ? მაშინ შენ მითხარი აბა, შენ იცი დენრეი cut.
Okay, so that's from teaching from the beginning. So this was done, it's dramatization. It was done at the UCLA Child Development Center. But well, let me ask you, anybody know what language that person was speaking? Iranian or Farsi? Any other ideas? No, it was in Hebrew. Arabic? No. Urdu? No. Georgian. It was Georgian. But the idea, how do you think those children felt? Lost? Bored? Disconnected? None of them were acting up. A lot of times they'll act up, especially the ones in the back, right? They'll act up. So think about anxious. Think about the affect of these children who are in a classroom where they do not understand what is going on, how they feel. And in fact, there's research that shows that when teachers are asked to rate the socio-emotional development of dual language learners at the beginning of school, they will rate them more harshly and more negatively. And the reason, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the reason why that occurs, is because they're not paying attention because they don't know what to do. They can't follow directions because they don't understand the language. And then the teachers kind of get frustrated because they're not doing what the teachers are asking them to do. So when a child doesn't know the language of the school, there is a real danger of that child seeing school as not a positive place to be. So one of the things or messages that I want to talk about is the importance of the socio-emotional context of this child or development of the child. Because that lays the foundation for learning. If the child does not feel like they're in a safe environment and a welcoming environment, and if you don't feel like you're in a safe or welcoming environment, think about it. When you're in, like, even in higher education, you're just like sitting there like, oh God, get me out of here. Then you're less apt to learn. It's like my daughters always used to tell me, I don't like the teacher. And if they didn't like the teacher, that meant that they weren't going to pay attention to that teacher. And my response, because I went to school with nuns, is that all you saw was this part of their face, was, I went to school with nuns and they didn't have a lot of positive affective tone. And I had to learn, but that was my response to my girls. But the role of socio-emotional development in learning lays the foundation. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about this issue. How many people have heard of the 30 million word gap? That's gotten a lot of publicity. I want to look under the hood with regards to the 30 million word gap because I think it's a deficit model. It's a deficit approach. So I want to talk a little bit about that because that lays the foundation for literacy. And I want to talk about, let me put this big. You can tell I'm not that technologically literate myself. I want to talk about the stages in second language acquisition. And that's where I will show you another video of a child who is Korean speaking over the course of 14 months and the stages of second language acquisition that she goes through in learning English. I want to talk about the importance of oral language development. How many of you went to Dr. Espinosa's workshop on Pole? A few of you. Did you go to Dr. Oliva Olson's presentation on dialogic reading? There were a few of you. You're going to see some themes here that are similar to what you heard in those other presentations. And that is actually a good thing because that means we're on the right track, okay? So I want to spend some time talking about that. And then what you probably came to hear was, okay, what is a particular technique that I can use for book reading? And so I was involved with the Nuestros Niños professional development program. And this comes out of Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute in North Carolina. And it was developed by colleagues of mine in North Carolina, Dina Castro and Christina Galanders and Jimena Franco. And it was, to a large degree, developed from monolingual English-speaking teachers who had a lot of Spanish-speaking teachers in their class, children in their classrooms. And so the focus was on how do you help monolingual English-speaking teachers work with children whose home language is not English. And as I said to you before, the probability of you having a child whose home language and home culture you do not understand, or the TK teacher, is extremely high in the state of California. I don't care what, if you're bilingual or trilingual, you may land up with a child from some other country and language that you have no familiarity with. I have no idea what that is. They're trying to tell us something. So I want to share with you their book reading protocol that they developed. Is that my computer? No. Oh, it's so, okay. And you have the actual protocol, and we're going to review parts of it in your handout that was published in Young Children. And it's called Storybook Reading for Young Dual Language Learners. It was published a number of years ago. So I want to spend some time at the very end. And the story that they're using here is La Cucaracha Martina. And this is in Spanish and English. But one of the things I do want to say is that these are techniques that you can apply to other language groups. We talk a lot about Spanish speakers because they're the ones that are the most predominant in the population of DLLs. They're about 80-some%. They're the big elephant in the room, followed by Korean. It depends on the year. Tagalog, Mandarin, and there was another one I can't remember. But they're relatively smaller percentages, but that doesn't mean that you won't still have that. And then you'll have, as was mentioned in the Fresno Language Project in the Central Valley, you have a lot of Hmong population. And Hmong, I believe, is not a written language, which presents other issues. And then in some parts of Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, you have indigenous languages. So it's not unusual that the child's family will speak Zapotec or Mixteco or something like that. And Spanish is actually their second language. Then English becomes their third language. So it gets complicated, and you can see why teachers sometimes are going, oh God, this teach them all English, because this gets too hard. But the issue with just let's teach them all English is that's what we've been doing in the state of California for a long time. And look what the achievement gaps look like for this group of children. It's not very good. And the latest data is suggesting, I think, a little increase in mathematics at 4th grade, but not in reading. So this is what I want to spend the time on. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, because I don't know about you, but I'm sick of PowerPoint. I am. It's like death by PowerPoint. So I'd like to, that's why I move around. So that it's like Linda, they only let her stay in one little area, but I get to move around. Okay, so socio-emotional development in DLLs is unique. Why is it unique? Well, number one, many of these children, they don't choose to be bilingual. They don't choose necessarily to have to speak 2 languages. That is their reality. They're born into that situation. And you got to remember that the bulk of the world population are bilingual. So it's not like this abnormal developmental process. It's a very normal process. But here in the United States, we tend to not value bilingualism as much as other countries. So the child is in a unique context where they have to develop multiple languages, or 2 languages at minimum. And those 2 languages, if you look at the 3rd bullet, will represent different sets of values and beliefs and systems and ways of doing things, depending on the language and the culture. One of the things that I often tell people when I'm doing these kinds of presentations is that language is not just about language. It's not just about the words. It's not just about the word order and the grammar. It transmits values and beliefs. That's how parents socialize their children. And in fact, there's phrases in languages that you cannot translate into English. So the common example often is given of the Eskimos having, 100 words for snow or something like that? Because that's their reality. They have a lot of snow, and they probably look at different features of snow and have different words. Different cultures have different ways of looking at life, and that's how it gets embedded in the language that they use. So, and then the example that's often given for Spanish-speaking populations is the term bien educado. The parents will say, I want my child to be bien educado. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean? Well, does it mean well educated? It means that you're polite, that you're respectful, that you follow whatever the cultural rules are for like the hierarchy to the elders. It doesn't mean you got your degree from Harvard. It's a different connotation completely. So the literal translation it's not a one-to-one. So that's what I mean. Language is more than just about learning the words. Okay? So, and then, as I said earlier, children learn language to get their needs met. And how do they get their needs met? Because babies are born helpless, right? They need somebody to take care of them. They need some way to signal the people that are taking care of them what their needs are. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I don't feel well. Children are very motivated to learn language, but they're motivated to learn, and they have to learn it within a social interaction, because we are wired to be social. Humans are wired to be social. We're social animals, and we're wired to be social because if we weren't wired to be social, we'd be dead. It's not like we're a little horse and we're born and we take off on all 4 legs and keep walking. Some people argue that we're sort of kids until like we're 25. Some of you who have children will know that adolescence lasts a long time. but they're very dependent on the grown-ups for a long, long period of time. So this ability to interact socially is very important. Okay. So why do we need to support the home language? This is a quotation from Ellen Bialystock at the University of York in Toronto, and she is the one that Linda mentioned earlier at the plenary that's done research on older people with regards to dementia and Alzheimer's, and finding that people that are bilingual have reduced levels or rates of dementia and Alzheimer's. Why? Because the brain has to work more. How many of you are bilingual in here? When you have to be using both languages, how do you feel? How do you feel? When you use it for extended periods of time, how do you feel? Tired? When I have to speak only in Spanish, because Spanish is even though I can speak it, I think, relatively well, and I can write it and I can read it, but if I have to function in it at an academic level with my colleagues from South America, I get tired. And I remember Dina one time told me, Marlene, we can speak in English if you want us to. And so, because it takes more energy. Your brain uses well, it's as good for weight control, I guess. Your brain uses more energy. It weighs about 10 pounds, I think. And it uses it when you're using, like when you've had like a heavy duty study day, and you feel like, oh, I'm really tired. Well, it's because your brain is using up a lot of energy. So when you're bilingual, your brain is working harder. And that actually is good in terms of flexibility, mental flexibility, in terms of heavier weight to your brain, because you have more connections. Linda talked about how different parts of your brain are active with different languages. But this is a quotation from Ellen where she basically talks about what language is, and that language is a tool to help us understand both our social and our cognitive worlds. So remember how I said in the beginning that social emotional development is the foundation, and that it is the means by which we interact with people, and it's a means to provide us access to concepts and meaning in whatever language we're learning. So it's both a social and a cognitive tool, but it's a tool, it's a medium, okay? So some of you said you had learned about the 30 million word gap. Not all of you, but some of you had mentioned that. The 30 million word gap comes from a study that was done, I believe, in Kansas. Was it Kansas? I believe it was Kansas. By Betty Hart and Todd Risley in the 1970s, I believe. But what they did was they looked at welfare, what they called welfare families, working class families, and professional families, many of them which were children of the professors from the university. And they went into the homes and they collected language samples of the children and the parents talking. Now we can audio record and do all those things, but in those days, you went there and you wrote everything down. Can you imagine that kind of research? But what was interesting about this was that they did it over an extended period of time. And part of our issue in understanding child growth and development is we don't have that much longitudinal data. And so what they discovered was there were real differences in the amount of language input that the children were hearing from in their homes, where the welfare children were hearing on average 13 million words. the working class 26, and the professional 45. And different anthropologist type people have commented on this. You know, one of the things I would tell my students is go to the supermarket and observe the parents at the checkout stand, okay? And talking to their, if in fact they're talking to the children. Which parents are talking more to their children? What are they saying to their children? You will see a marked difference between lower income and more higher income folk. And sociologically, people thought, well, that had to do with the type of employment that people had. Because if you were in higher paid positions, you had to use more vocabulary, you had to be writing. If you're a factory worker, maybe you don't have to do that kind of stuff, okay? So there's that explanation. This 30 million word gap has gotten a lot of traction at both the state and the federal level. When I saw this, and I actually had my students read an article that they published on meaningful differences, it is very much a deficit position. That because you are low income, you're going to be deprived. You're not going to have as many words. And part of the issue that I have with this is having studied immigrant Spanish-speaking populations, knowing what the cultural orientation is, and I studied infants for my dissertation. There is a different perspective on child growth and development by different cultural groups. When do they want their children to walk? When do they expect their children to walk, to talk, and talk? And often their perspective, when I would go into homes, especially of newborns, they wanted absolute quiet. They would close the blinds. They'd wrap up the kids like tamales, right? Because, and the evil eye, you couldn't have the evil eye. No, I'm serious, and it was like quiet, quiet, quiet. You're laughing because you know it's true. And when I would interview the parents about when they thought their child would develop language, they said that it was way further on down the road, that it was not their, they didn't see that, we have the talk, read, sing that we were talking about, and all this cognitive stimulation, but they didn't see that as their role. They saw their role, this notion of parent as teacher, they didn't see that. They saw their role as making sure the baby was fed, or the preschool child was fed and clothed, and that their basic needs were met, and there was, a roof over their head, and that the other stuff was up to the teachers, right, when they got to school. So some of this misses the boat with respect to the cultural factors that may influence some of these ideas or the way that they present in the homes. And a reanalysis of this 30 million word gap has found that it's not this big. It is actually much smaller. And but one of the challenges that we have as educators is that we know the children have to develop vocabulary. We know that they have to develop English. We know that. How do we help them do that and frame it in a way that doesn't make these populations look like they're not doing what they should be doing? Okay. So one of the ways that I try to reframe this notion of a 30 million word gap, or the gap, if you will, is not so much in terms of words, but in terms of conceptual knowledge. It's concepts. And in bilingual theory, there is this notion of what they call the interdependence hypothesis. The idea being that once you know one language, it's easier to transfer some of that information to a second language. Okay? How many of you have learned another language, and gone to school to try to learn another language? You're laughing? You still can't speak it. But didn't you, when you were learning that language, didn't you use your first language to try to figure out what the second language was trying to do? You use what you know as your frame of reference. So the interdependence hypothesis, which actually when we first started studying this dual language, God, all I remember, we used to have all these fights about it because there were people, particularly in the K through 12, or people that will remain nameless. They said, oh no, there is no transfer between these two languages. But the fact of the matter is, there is. And that's one of the issues. Is it still on, or did it go off? No, you dropped it. Oh, here I am. Thank you. No problem. I feel like a baby, huh? You got to do it. The idea being that concept formation is what I would put my emphasis on. And concept formation, and this is actually, I used to do this with parents because they would get concerned about their child maintaining their home, why should they help their child maintain their home language when they're going into an English-only environment. And the way to do it is think about it not so much as words, but as concepts. So, for example, these are cognates. Like the crocodile. Once a child knows what the crocodile is, and that's not a good example, let me give you a better example. Okay, this is a better example, more simple example. Once a child knows what the color is, the color red, or the color blue, or the color yellow, once they know that that's a color, and that color is yellow, and every time I see that color, it's that color, yellow. All I have to then learn is the other label for it in another language. The concept doesn't change. The label for the language changes. And that's what I would explain to parents, that by talking to their children in their home language, it was going to strengthen their conceptual development that would then transfer later on down the road. And that made sense to them. Because as was said earlier in some of the commentary, often parents are very nervous about maintaining the home language or stimulating the home language. And the issue for me, and the theory is very clear that there is this interdependence between the first language and the second language. Now, the interdependence is greater when the languages are similar. So we've been speaking a lot about Spanish and English, and in some of your other workshops, you got lists of cognates, words that sound the same in the two languages. But if you're with Hmong, which doesn't have a written language, I think that's correct, right? Hmong doesn't. Who's in the Central Valley that has Hmong? I don't think they have that. Which one? Mixteco. Or if you have a non-alphabetic language, like Mandarin, it's going to be a different ball of wax in terms of the transferability, because it's not going to be as easy. So the Romance languages are much easier: Spanish, French, Romanian, Italian. Okay, so concept development. So think about concept development in terms of strengthening the L1, the first language, that will then transfer over. So when the child is presented with that concept in English, it's not like it's a new concept to them. They know what the concept is, they just don't know what the word is that goes along with it. Okay, so now, how many of you have heard of the stages of second language acquisition with English language learners? One person, and she put her hand down. Ophelia. Okay, good, because I didn't want to bore you with this. Okay. God, when did the One Child, Two Languages come out? Like 10 years ago? Something like that. Patton Tabor's book, One Child, Two Languages, came out, where she did observational research, and this was on the East Coast, and began to describe the stages of second language acquisition that occur in preschool children. When they do not know English and they are trying to learn the language. And so she said that there were very predictable stages of the child, of the stages that the child will go through. And the first one is the child goes into the classroom or into the early learning setting, and they are going to try to get their needs met, right? But how? They're going to have to use their home language because they don't know any of the words. So they try to use their home language, figure out it ain't working. Nobody's understanding, or the teacher's not understanding me. I'm not getting my needs met. I remember one case, I think this was in New York, and it was either Cantonese or Mandarin, where a little girl peed in her pants because she couldn't tell she couldn't communicate that she needed to go to the bathroom. So children will either not say anything, or they will try to communicate in their home language, but then their needs aren't being met. So that's their first reaction of the children. So once they figure out, hey, I'm using this way of communicating, nobody's understanding what the heck is going on, well, then I'm going to just pull back and be quiet and watch. When you travel this is the example I often give. When you travel to a foreign country and you don't know the language, what do? You observe. You observe. So say you need to go to the bathroom in the restaurant, you're kind of looking, where's everybody walking, you know? You stand back and you observe to see what the rules and regulations are. And so that's what will happen. They stop using their home language because it's not getting their needs met, and they start to become observant. And that's known as the quiet period. Then they will try to begin to use some words. And these are more high-frequency words, or words that will get them, get their message across. And it reminds me of the way infants communicate, because they'll say, wanna, or wanna, I want it, and using gestures. And that's very characteristic of a young child, a very young child. So they will start to use want it, or please, or give me, or play, or they'll try to get one or two or three words that have some salience for them to get some of their needs met. So that's what she talks about in terms of telegraphic speech. And then the children will start to use formulaic speech, which is things like look it, gimme, all gone, before they move into a more productive level of language development. We actually use these stages and try to formulate the English language development foundations in the preschool foundations, which are over 10 years old and they need to be updated. So we'd like to see them updated, because when we were developing that, we had very little information. So what I want to do is show you a video of a child who is a Korean speaker, goes into the preschool, and she goes through these stages of second language acquisition. And it'll show you how that works. So hopefully this works.
Is it a cookie?
What we know about young dual language learners when they're learning a second language is that they often go through fairly predictable stages of language development, approximately 4 stages. In observing Soyul, we see these stages in action, though not all children go through the stages in exactly the same way. The notion of stages serves as a general outline that a number of investigators have proposed and provides us with a starting point to attend to the needs of young dual language learners.
Can you do Tokichi? Tokichi. What's Tokichi?
And the first stage is when the child is
Is this Tokichi?
going to a child care center, for example, only knows their primary language or their first language, uses their first language, and they find that it's not working very well because they're only going to communicate in the way that they know how to communicate, which is their home language.
What is it? Is it a cookie? Tokichi? Tokichi. What's Tokichi? Is it structure? Is this Tokichi?
So in the case of Soyul, when she's working with the blocks, you can see that she is using some words, and the teacher interprets it as structure. And the teacher says, does that mean structure in Korean? And we're never quite sure if it does or if it doesn't. But Soyul keeps using the word, and of course the teacher tries to use the word as well. And Soyul is only using the language that she is familiar with. So that is very characteristic of that first stage of development.
Tokichi?
Well, the child comes in already having a language. That's a strength. They have something they can communicate with the world. It helps them make sense out of the world. It helps them build relationships. During that first stage, where they're being exposed to a second language, which is typically English, and they realize their first language isn't going to work with everybody. So they start to figure out that there is a new environment, a new language environment that they're going to have to figure out how to work in.
After she has been in the setting for a period of time, Soyul will move into what we call the quiet stage, or the stage where she's just saying, hey, my home language, my primary language, I'm using it, but it doesn't seem to get my needs met, so maybe I'm going to sit back and watch and listen and observe what's going on to try to figure out, well, what words will get my needs met? What words can I use? And so the second language learner will move into a quiet period where they are observant, they're nonverbal. But it's very important to realize that just because they're quiet and nonverbal doesn't mean they're not learning. They are still engaged with what is going on.
Thank you. Oh, look at this one. Bird. Bird says, tweet, 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 tweet. Cat. Cat says, what does cat say, Soyul? Cat says, ruff, ruff. Or meow. Cat says, meow.
So in Soyul's case, for example, the teacher is reading her a book, and you can see how Soyul is very focused on the text, or on the pictures probably in the book, and is listening to what the teacher says. You can see that she probably doesn't understand everything that the teacher is saying. The teacher is saying how the bird goes tweet, tweet, the cat goes meow, meow. But she is trying to give Soyul some words that Soyul can latch onto. And so that is more characteristic of the quiet stage. The child is just taking in all of that vocabulary. The teacher is very effective in trying to give her vocabulary words that she can learn.
Children who are going through these stages of second language development, when they enter into the second stage, it takes a lot of concentration. They have to listen an awful lot. It's a time when they're not really going to be producing anything. They're going to use all their nonverbal skills as a language participant in the classroom. They'll tug on you. They'll grab your hand and pull you over, so you'll play with them. They'll cry when they want something. They'll use all those communication skills because they know their first language isn't going to get them anything at that moment because it's not understood.
After the child has been in the quiet stage for a while, and again, we don't quite know how long a child will stay in any particular stage. It depends on the child's personality characteristics, how motivated they are to learn the second language, and it also depends on the quality of the language inputs that are going on in the child's environment. So after that particular stage, what we're calling the quiet stage, the child moves into the formulaic or the telegraphic stage. And this is a stage where the child has picked up a few words and will begin to do some word chunking, for example. So they'll say things like look it, they'll blend look it or wanna. And those words really help to draw attention to something or tell somebody, I need help, I want something. And so the child will begin to experiment with those words, start to practice it, go public with those words, and then when they have some success with it, then they will move on to the next stage. In Soyul's particular case, what you see is that she is using these one-word phrases, if you will.
Try some chocolate milk. Go, 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 go. Try
She is at the sand table, and another child comes up to her, is talking to her, and she says, no, no. The child says something about chocolate milk. She says, no, no, and we're not quite sure if she's saying it's dirty or she's trying to use one-word phrases to communicate to her friend that she doesn't want what her friend is offering her. And so she's using these one-word phrases to get her message across and to get her needs met.
You know, young children are notorious for picking up other people's words. So as they're hearing children in the sandbox say, give me that, it's mine, you can't have it, go away, those are the phrases they're going to repeat. They get action happening. They'll also pick up the names of their favorite toys. One of the first words I often hear the children say is teacher, because it gets the adult to come over to them. So teacher is a very powerful word.
Bye.
I also want to point out the difference in affective tone that you see with Soyul from the quiet stage to the more the telegraphic stage, where she is able to produce. She is so happy. You can really see a difference in her facial expressions and in her whole demeanor. Further in that particular sequence, you see Soyul very happy greeting her friends. And she is pointing out and naming different children who are her friends. And so she is saying the person's name is my friend. I believe that's what she's saying. And so she has used a formula. Aaron's my friend, Mary's my friend, Johnny's my friend. So she has kind of figured that out. That is characteristic of this formulaic or telegraphic speech stage.
I'm making the airplane. I'm making airplane. This is the airplane. I'm making the castle. I'm making that castle too.
That's what's going on with the telegraphic and the formulaic speech, is they get these formulas, these rules about how you make sentences. I'm going to make I'm going to make the airplane, I'm going to make the sandcastle, I'm going to make the whatever. And you insert different words or nouns at the end of the sentence, and it's very characteristic. And so you start to see her doing that. And I don't know if sandcastle was a brand new word for her, but it's clear to me that she's trying to practice that word.
And here. Oh, okay. Here.
There's the spider.
Spider house.
Oh, it's a spider house. You know what a spider house is called? It's called a spider web. Spider web. Oh, stop.
Spider web.
Go back.
It's
Go back.
spider web.
So you can look.
It's spider web.
This is a
In the situation of the spider or the spider web, it's very interesting to watch how she is the one that brings everybody's attention to this and says, spider, spider house. And then the teacher comes over and says, It's a spider web. That we call it a spider house, a spider web. And then she gets all excited because she has a new word for it. And she says, web, spider web. And so here you see Soyul really at the transition stage of moving into production. She's initiating conversation. She's very comfortable with it. She's very attuned to listening to new vocabulary that she can latch onto to describe meaningful activity or events in her life. And what's very interesting to watch here is the role of the teacher in providing her with that language and the vocabulary to support and extend her knowledge of English.
Where's spider? I don't know. I found it.
After the child has had some experiences with that, they will finally move into the more productive stage of second language acquisition, where you're going to get more whole phrases and more lengthy utterances. And what's characteristic of this particular stage is you'll get more original language from the child.
What is ballet?
Kind of movement.
A kind of what?
Kind of movement.
A kind of movement. Do you have any special things you wear for ballet? What do you wear for ballet?
Ballet. Ballet clothes.
Ballet clothes. What does it look like?
Pink.
It's pink?
Yeah, and we have pink treasure.
And pink treasures.
And then pink flowers.
Pink flowers.
And in Soyul's case, you very much see that when she is talking to the teacher about the ballet lesson that she has. In that particular case, she says to the teacher that ballet is either a kind or type of movement. Nobody told her that sentence. She's not imitating anybody. She came up with it by herself. The teacher then continues to ask her very open-ended questions about her ballet shoes, and you can see that she's much more fluid in her language production by stage 4.
Ballet shoes.
Why do you need ballet shoes?
Because you have to dance.
You have to dance. Oh.
So they're picking up a huge amount of vocabulary during that fourth stage. They are continuing to absorb the language, listen to the language, and then produce it quickly. So they need lots and lots and lots of experiences, both listening to the language and trying to express themselves.
And teacher.
That's right. Good job. You read the whole book to me.
This following of one child over the course of 14 months illustrates the stages very clearly. And that you see how the child comes in knowing no English whatsoever, and with the help and support of her teachers in an environment that's warm and welcoming, she blossoms over the course of time into a little girl who is producing original phrases and is understanding what is going on around her, who is interacting with her peer group. And so over the course of this 14 months, she is able to learn enough English that she can function within her context, and it illustrates the 4 stages that we've been talking about very, very well.
Why do you need ballet shoes?
Because you have to dance.
You have to dance. Oh.
Okay, so there you saw illustrated in Soyul's case the 4 stages. What struck you about those? What did you notice, or did you see anything in there that you thought that you're seeing in the children that you're working with?
Usually the children use the first language in a short time and then they stop. I've seen that case, but I have a couple of children continue to use the native language the whole time. She's speaking to me in Spanish, I speak to her in English, and we both communication just fine until from the beginning to the end, and I follow up that child with
She's doing well. Did you all hear the commentary that the child continues to use her native language? It could be the context in which the child is in, where she can speak her native language to her peer group, and the issue is that you are responding to her in English. She's understanding you, and you're understanding her. So it's like we're both getting our needs met. So what's the problem, right?
So there's no issue, and then she went on fine, just whatever I taught, whatever she's learning, she's just fine that she met all of the ERDP and everything else. So I just left it as it is.
And is she speaking how's her English now?
Her English is getting better towards the end.
Her English is getting better. Okay. Any other thoughts about what you saw?
Is it possible to be circular in this, that there are periods where they're using their home language and they become quiet and they go back to the home language?
I would think so. You know, we don't empirically know how long they stay in certain stages of development. This is over 14 months, and it probably depends on how much support they're getting. It's not unusual for children to regress, depending on what's going on in their lives. So I could see that occurring, absolutely. Debbie?
During this period of time, is the family continuing to use the home language?
If you have an opportunity, I would go and see the videos. There's an interview with the parents of Soyul, and this is the UCLA Child Development Center for parents who are in married student housing. And the parents are very nervous, especially the mom, that she was going to lose Korean. That was their concern, that she was going to lose Korean while she was learning English. And there's other parts of the video that show that where she is teaching Korean to the teacher. And there's another Korean-speaking child, and they're teaching Moyeses, who's the director of the center. They're teaching him how to count, I believe, in Korean. And so there is always that concern, I think, and I think the parental anxiety, and it's well-founded. And so I think the issue is how much exposure are they getting to the language? Linda mentioned this morning, and that was also something that sort of was up in the air for a long time, was how much language do they have to hear in each language? And she said 40 to 50% of the language. And that's an issue with trilingual children in particular, because how do you divide it all up, it's really hard to say that one child will be fine and another child may not be so fine. It really depends on the child and the circumstances. One of the issues here, for those of you who are working with dual language learners and recognizing what stage of second language acquisition they are in, is very important for what you're going to do to support that language. Because if they're in the quiet stage, then you saw teacher Yvette continuing to provide her with some language input and not expecting her necessarily to be responsive, but just giving and just bathing her in that language, whereas maybe the child that's more in the formulaic stage, you want to extend their language and give them more vocabulary, sentence frames, which is what where she was using, is I'm going to build an airplane, I'm going to build a sandcastle.
I just wanted to share, I grew up speaking English in a different country, 2 different countries actually, both British-based, one in Africa and one in England. And then I came to the United States, so when people ask me if I'm bilingual, there's a very different way to speak in English.
That's right.
Versus American.
That's right.
And it's not just about the words, it's about the intentionality. And so I'm often in meetings and I'm expressing myself, and the words that I'm using have a different connotation.
Yes.
And so I try to remember that when I'm working with my students who are adult learners, because I am code switching quite a bit.
Yes.
Because the intensity of the tone, the meaning of the word, the sentence structure, the syntax, it's very different, and people don't realize that if you're from the south of the United States, I lived in Maryland for a while, And so even though we're speaking English, and so the enormity of then adding another language on top of that, it's quite mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And thank you for understanding, because I can see that you believe me.
No, I
because
do believe that.
Frequently I tell this to people and they don't believe that I'm
No, and
bilingual.
no, the reason my dissertation advisor was British.
Yeah.
British humor, I don't get. So he would say these jokes and he'd start laughing and laughing, and I'd be sitting there and I'd be going, what is this man talking about? But I knew that it was a cultural difference. That's why I'm saying language is more than just about language. It's about the values and culture. We have different phraseology. So for example, when we're teaching, and we came across this in the English Language Development Foundations, when you say to children, oh, it's raining cats and dogs, and this child is going to do, are we going to see cats and dogs coming down? And because and there's a lot of phrases like that in English.
And I was going to add that it becomes an equity issue. So I have a president who knows that if I go and practice, I can pull this out. And when he wants me to help him raise money...
He wants you to be more British.
Correct. But we also are living in a society right now where the way in which we speak is very much judged.
Yes, yes.
And I lost much of this because of American need for very fast speaking.
Yes.
I worked retail before I went back to school.
Yes.
And so I think we need to be very aware of our young children holding on to something that is being right now demeaned and judged and should be upheld and praised.
Well, I think you're raising a good point, because it's in U.S. society, we value verbosity. Verbosity, is that the right word? We value people that talk a lot. Correct. Let's face it, we do. Now, there's a lot of people that talk a lot and are not saying anything. And people that are quiet, we just think, what's wrong with them? But yet in Asian culture, if you're quiet, that actually is a good thing. So it is a matter of the values of the society in which we operate and what is valued and what is not valued. This is very interesting to me. I could go on and on about it, but I think you're absolutely right. There's dialectical differences, there's idiosyncratic differences in the way that people talk on the East Coast versus the West Coast. We could go on and on.
Where there are countries who speak where the language is Spanish, but the conjugation of the daily interactions the conjugation is completely different than what you go to school and learn and how you write or anything else. And vos, tener.
Yeah, because you use vos with me, and I'm just like, what is she saying?
And then there's vos in Uruguay, which is a different conjugation, but and then there's in Nicaragua, and there's
Right.
Costa Rica.
Right. So there's all of these differences and nuances to language.
I just was struck by her affect during the observation period. Because you talked about, language being, social emotional development.
Being the foundation.
So there's a really strong role that the teacher has to play, because if they begin to isolate themselves or just kind of, check out,
Right.
because they can't communicate with anyone, that could be very detrimental to other learning taking place, not just language,
Right.
but friendships
Right.
and all those things. So I appreciated that the teacher was spending some one-on-one time with her, because she needs to feel that
Right.
relationship
Right.
piece, so that she doesn't, get affected in another way.
Right.
with her social
And you could see her affect, her flat
it was so
affect.
sad.
It was very flat. And then when she moved into the next stage, she was like much more animated. So that's why the social emotional piece is so important. And I know one of the issues that came up this morning in the plenary was the size of the classrooms, and how can you give individual attention when, what's the number of children that you all have? 25, and no assistant teacher. And maybe, hopefully, maybe you could get some parent volunteers. One of the things that, and then Linda told me afterwards, she goes, God, Marlene, we should have told them that they should do centers and then have the children rotate, and that you work with a small group of children at a time. But that means you're going to have a loud classroom. And some administrators, I know because I've worked with some of them, they don't like that. But the fact of the matter is, and this kind of will take us into the, transition us into the next topic, is you want them talking. You want them engaged. And if they're engaged, they're going to talk. And that means the noise level is going to be higher. So you have to, I think we as early educators, we know that. But sometimes people that are not early educators, they go, well, what the heck's going on? And so that's why you have a tendency to do whole group instruction, where we know that only a certain percentage of those children are really being affected by what it is that you're doing, and they're usually the ones that sit right in front of you, right? And not the ones in the back. Any other comments that somebody would like to make about the second language?
How do you support the parent that wants them to retain their home language? And you don't speak it.
Well, then you would have to use, and we can get into the book reading, then you would have to, one of the things that you have to accept, and this is what is the reality, if you're in a bilingual program or a dual immersion program, you're going to have more work. You're going to have more work. You're going to have to possibly translate books, use wordless books, work with parents to translate, work with older siblings to help you audio record books, provide you with some songs or so you got to figure out some way to begin to help to support that child. Now, you cannot do it as well as a native speaker of that child's language. But I think parents appreciate teachers who make the effort. And I have seen that. When parents see that the teacher is making the effort to learn the child's name, to learn about their family, those of you who went to the poll presentation in terms of the families and getting the families involved, the families are the first informants of their child's growth and development. And to the extent that parents can help you with what Luis Moll calls the funds of knowledge, that they bring in their experiences to the classroom. They share if they have poetry or what stories or oral traditions or dance or music or whatever. That is at least sending a message that I value you. Now, you may not be able to, support every aspect of that child's home language development, but at least you're sending a message to the family and to that child that you matter and your language matters. And that, I think, is very, very important because so many of our children are ashamed of their parents speaking a language other than English. Okay? So there are things that you can do. And we go until 5 o'clock? Okay. So I want to get into the book reading because I think you can transfer, even though we're talking about Spanish, you could use other languages here. Okay? Was there another comment? Okay. So let's talk about, we did the soyul. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about oral language development. One of the major messages, I hope that those of you who are going to all these book reading workshops, is the importance of giving the child an opportunity to use their language. And there is research that shows, and this is done by Sharon Ritchie over at Frank Porter Graham, that shows even up to 3rd grade, the teachers are talking all the time. It's not the students that are talking, it's the teachers that are talking. And so you have to start to think about, how can I get these children, how can I plan activities to get the children to talk, give them opportunities to practice? Because it's not just enough to hear the language and listen, you need that, but you're never going to learn to produce a language unless you have opportunities to practice the language. So oral language development is really, really important. And read-alouds or literature, children's literature, can provide a really good platform for you to begin to utilize it as a means to convey vocabulary, or the concepts, right, that we talked about before, the phonology or the sound. Phonology refers to the sound of words, the sound system, because different languages have different sound systems. So the children are exposed to the sound system. The syntax or the grammar of the language, okay, the word order, okay. Where do the adjectives go? In English, they go before the noun. In Spanish, they go after the noun. And that's why you'll get the car red as opposed to the red car from Spanish speakers. The issue of decontextualized language. Decontextualized language is a language of books. This language is not of the here and now. And decontextualized language is what school is all about. Because when you get to the point of reading textbooks, it's all about another place, another time. And young children have to start to begin to be exposed to that. They normally are in the present tense, and they can tell you maybe what happened yesterday. So it helps with decontextualized language, print knowledge in terms of handling books, phonological awareness, the rhymes, alliteration, how the sounds, again with the sound system, and the actual alphabet. Okay, so these are aspects, and the reason oral language is so important, and it was mentioned a number of times in the different workshops, is that, and if you look at the National Academy report, and also if you look at another national report on reading, that was done by our friend. No, it was August. Yeah, it was August, but it was on reading and pre-K, and we critiqued it actually. But oral language development and narrative or retelling of stories, right? Narrative development will predict future reading capability. So what we're really talking about here, what we're really talking about here is reading readiness. I mean, we're not using those terms, but that's what it is. This is reading readiness. So it connects to later success in reading, and reading is a big issue in terms of our student population and their ability to be successful. Okay, so let me give you an example of a storybook. And you do have a handout, which is this one, which was published by Cristina Galanders and Dina Castro. These are two of the professors or colleagues that I've worked with and when they were at Frank Porter Graham. And we use this technique, or this storybook technique, in the Nuestros Niños professional development program, where we went into basically, in California, we were in Head Start sites. And what they did was they chose, I think there's about 11 books that are available both in English and Spanish. Now, again, if Spanish is not the first language of the home, you would need to find some books that might be in Mandarin and English, or whatever the other language happens to be, or translate the book. That's why I said being a bilingual teacher is more work. And what you need to do, we did is we identified core vocabulary words. What are the words in the book that we want to really stress and teach the children? And these are words that, and you don't have to pick all of these words, but these are words that occur in La Cucaracha Martina. Cucaracha Martina is a Caribbean, or comes from the Caribbean or Cuban, right, folktale. And what's interesting about this book, I thought, was it's about a cockroach who, how many people know this story? Very few. It's very famous in Latin America. It's very famous. It's about a cockroach who hears a beautiful noise, because the cockroach lives in probably New York City, Okay, how many people have been to New York City? It is noisy. It is a noisy place. So this cockroach is in the city, in this urban area, and hears a beautiful noise and wants to find the source of the beautiful noise. And so one day she decides that she's going to get gussied up and beautified, and so she gets a mirror and lipstick and powder. And this is what really I have to laugh, because who was I speaking with? I was speaking to another colleague earlier about cockroaches, because you would think that you would not make the cockroach the heroine of a story, you know? But where I grew up, there were a lot of cockroaches. And I was pretty comfortable with cockroaches because they were like everywhere, every time you turn on the lights at night. So, you know, and if you live in an urban area, you are going to find a lot of vermin and cockroaches. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they chose to talk about cockroaches. So she gets all gussied up and she puts lipstick on. So lipstick, I believe, is one of the words I thought. And she goes out and to town, and she meets different animals. And all the animals are asking her to marry them. So she meets a dog, and the dog asks her to marry. She says, "Oh, you look so beautiful. You know, will you marry me?" And she goes, "No." And she goes, "No, I'm looking for I'm looking for somebody or something with a beautiful noise, the beautiful noise." And he goes, "Woof, woof." And she goes, "No, that's not it." So she goes on and meets other animals, and all the animals, a pig, a rat, a rooster, meets different animals, and they are all asking her to marry them. And she says no, because they're not making the beautiful noise. And so the story goes on until she meets, I think it's the cricket at the very end. And it's the cricket who makes the beautiful noise. And that's the one that she lands up marrying. Okay, so this is La Cucaracha Martina. It's available in Spanish and English. The children love this book. Now, how do we use it? We identify the words. It's explained in detail in your handout, but we explain it. You start off with a picture walk, okay, where you might have some picture cards. I actually went to Lakeshore to try to find actual, animals and props, so that and I'm going to show you a video where a teacher actually uses them. But you want to start to give them some of the vocabulary, right, that's used in the book. And you say, well, what is this? How many people know what this is? So before you even start to read the story, you're starting to talk about the core vocabulary. And you engage them in a dialogue about the core vocabulary before you actually start to read the book. Then after you do that, you read, and if you can't read it, maybe you have a parent read it, or somebody else that knows the child's home language. You read the story in the child's home language first.
Is the picture walk in English?
No, the picture walk would be in the home language in the beginning for the child. Because you want to start off in the home language with the idea being that you're going to transition over. So you do that, and then after that, you would say, okay, remember when we talked about La Cucaracha, when Mrs. Martinez read the book to you in Spanish? Well, now we're going to read it in English, okay? And remember the vocab, and then you would do the vocabulary. Okay, here's a cerro. What do you call this in English? This is a pig. And so then you would start to give them the core vocabulary in English, and then so you do a picture walk in English, right? And then you would read the story to them in English. What is the advantage of doing it that way? Well, they know what the heck's going on in the story. You know, they've heard the story in their home language, so they know what the story's about. And you know, children, they love repetition. And so now they're hearing it in the other language so they can follow it in the other language. You had a comment?
So there's 6 steps, because after reading in the child's first language, then you do a picture walk in the
I would do that, yeah, I would recommend doing a picture one.
And for the picture walk, if you're a monolingual teacher, you're just saying, how do you say this in Spanish?
If the picture walk, the first picture walk should be in the home language. So if you're not able to do it, then you would try to find somebody that could help you do it. The second picture walk, which is the step I'm inserting, would be the one where you would do it. But what this means for you is you got to learn the vocabulary. You have to learn the vocabulary. Now, you don't have to learn to read the whole book in the first language, but you need to learn the vocabulary so that when you're doing it in English, you can go between the two core words in both the home language and in English. And then you read it in English, and I am going to show you a video on that. But what has happened with La Cucaracha Martina, the children love this book. You can do extended activities where you could put like a wedding gown or veil in the dress-up corner, and a hat for the boys, and they get married in the dress-up corner. You can extend this into the science center with all the animals. You could put it in the listening center for all the sounds of the animals that they're making. So there's different things that you could do, and you could extend this for weeks. And this is what we saw in the Head Start Center. The children and then they could do it in the art center. You could do a retell, and they could draw a story. They could retell the story. What did you like best about it? So there's all kinds of, and some of them are listed in that handout for you. There's all kinds of related activities that you can set up in your classroom. You could set up a felt board with all the different animals so they could retell the story. So there's a lot of different things that you could do to extend it. And so those of you that were in the poll, they talked about an anchor book. It's basically you use a text or you use the children's literature to begin to build other related activities, but that you use the core vocabulary. That forces the children to use the core vocabulary over and over again. Okay, so that's the idea. And so the dramatization, if you go on YouTube, you can actually see puppet shows of Cucaracha Martina. You can see children acting it out. So there's all kinds of activities that one could do for this. So let me show you, I know I'm showing you a lot of videos, but this is a video that was done in North Carolina using La Cucaracha Martina.
Today, boys and girls, we're going to read our favorite story this week, La Cucaracha Martina. See, La Cucaracha Martina. But before we read, let's go over our words that we've been talking about this week with our story, okay?
Yes.
Now, what was this picture?
Cockroach.
Cucaracha. Roach. And there's our roach.
He's
dead. He's real, but he's dead, and we've looked at him all week. That's the roach.
What?
Another word is
Cricket.
cricket.
Grillo.
Cricket. And there's our cricket. And another word, what was this? Sound or noise. Yes, we've got some noise that we listen to with our ears. Ruido. Noise. Very good. One more. Beautiful. Hermoso. Beautiful. Those are our words that we're learning from this book this week, La Cucaracha cucaracha Martina. Now, yesterday, Miss Naomi read it to you in what language? Spanish. Espanol. See, in Spanish, Miss Naomi read it to us yesterday. So today, Miss Tammy is going to read it to you in English. So you will understand the story in English. But you know, I'm going to need your help today. Can you help me with the story today?
Yeah.
Do you remember all of the props that I have for our story yesterday? I'm going to give you a prop from our story. And you hold on to your prop, hold on to your item until we get to your page in the story.
No.
One person will have to hold the cockroach. Yes. So I want you to get your prop and hold it in your lap. And when we read the story La Cucaracha Martina today, when you see your item in the book, you're going to come and put it in the middle of the circle so we can all see what is in our story. Okay? Can you help me?
Yeah!
All right, kiss your brain. I know you're feeling smart. Here we go. Let me give everybody something to hold. Jasmine, you want to hold beautiful? Okay. You can hold a beautiful thing. Would anybody like to hold the cockroach? Wilmer, you don't mind? Well, great. Thank you, Wilmer, for volunteering. Albert, would you hold the cricket?
I will hold the snake.
I need a cricket holder. Lindsay.
I will hold the snake.
Now, I'm going to give you some
There's
other
a
things.
I want that. I want that
Can
pink.
I give? Janine, I'm going to give you a ring. Okay.
Tammy, Mrs. the dog.
And you'll hold the snake. Oh, and the bumblebee was buzzing in the story. Elsie, you hold the bumblebee. Thank you, Marcus. Fine, very good. That's our new word, fine. And this is the title, La Cucaracha Martina. I need you to read it. You read it. La
Cucaracha Martina.
One more time.
La Cucaracha Martina.
Excellent. Put it in your lap.
A car.
Do you know what to do?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what you're holding in your hand?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know what to do with it?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Listen to the story of La Cucaracha Martina. La Cucaracha Martina didn't care much for life in the big city. She did not like the animals who hung out on the street corner, and the thought of getting stepped on frightened her terribly. So what is she scared of?
The car. Stepped on.
Yeah, she's scared a car is going to run over her, and she's scared she's going to get stepped on because she's a little roach. Who has the cockroach? La Cucaracha. Ah, placed it in the middle. Gracias. Thank you, Wilmer.
I want to hold your makeup.
But it was the noise that Martina liked the least. Who has noise? Excellent. It was the noise that she did not like. The loud city sounds hurt her tiny ears and kept her awake at night. On special nights, however, when all else was still, Martina would hear a beautiful noise, a soft, gentle sound that came whispering through the night. It was the most fabulous noise she had ever heard and made her feel all funny inside. Early one Monday morning, La Cucaracha Martina decided to fix herself up and go out in search of the beautiful noise. Who has
Jasmine!
Yeah. Oh, let's see if it says we're beautiful. Beautiful. That's our special word. So there's our lipstick and our mirror. She's making herself look beautiful. And she's going out in search of a beautiful noise. She took some money over to the market and she purchased a lipstick, an eye pencil, a hairbrush, 3 pieces of bubble gum, and a big box of good smelling talcum powder. Martina worked quickly. She brushed her hair and fixed her face. She shined her shoes and buttoned up her dress. Never before had there been a more beautiful cockroach. Say frog.
Frog.
Frog. And what was this one for you?
Chicken.
What kind of chicken?
Rooster.
Rooster. Let's say rooster.
Rooster.
Good. And one more. duck. Very good, Natalie. Can you hand me the duck? Wonderful. The
And
duck.
the one.
Did La Cucaracha want to marry these animals?
No.
Tell me the animal that she married.
Cricket.
The cricket.
Mine.
Why did she marry the cricket?
Because she made a beautiful noise.
Because the cricket made a beautiful noise. Hermoso ruido. See. Ruido hermoso. A beautiful noise from the grillo, the cricket. Very good. Okay. So, let me get my cards and we will say our words once more. Find your spot. Very good. Thank you. Let's go over our words.
Roach.
Cricket.
Cricket.
Noise.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay, boys and girls, good listening, and thank you for helping me with the story. Let's kiss our brains.
I mean, the audio was really terrible. It's probably, I transferred it so many times probably. But you got the idea that they had already been prepped in their home language first. They had heard the story in their home language. Then, and they've had a focus on the core vocabulary words that they were focusing on. And then you present the information in English. So the children are able to, they know the story, they understand what's going on. They're paying attention to the core vocabulary words by giving them the props that also, I think, elevates their attention. Because I get to stand up and I get to hold a cockroach, and that was probably a great thing to have a cockroach. And then I was actually looking for a noisemaker too, to make like an awful noise, and I couldn't find anything that made an awful noise. So if I was a teacher, I'd have to figure that out if I had to use it in the classroom. But this is a technique that you can use with whatever book you have. It doesn't have to be Cucaracha Martina, but the idea being that you have the book, the child is exposed to the story in their home language first, given the core vocabulary, talked about that, gets an understanding of that prior to them hearing it in the second language. Okay. This is not for a dual immersion classroom. This is to use the home language to support English language, okay? That's what this is about, because this was developed primarily for monolingual English-speaking teachers in South Carolina, where the focus was on English language acquisition. But it is a technique that you can use to support the home language and to support English language development. So I wanted to show you that. And again, as I said, it's all detailed in the, and I showed the video. I know, I was going to print up the picture of the cockroach, but. So you can have related activities, props. I was trying to get props for you all, picture cards for retelling, like on the flannel board, the listening center, dramatic play center. Do you all have centers? Do the TK teachers? That's good. Science center, the sand and water table, reading center, music center, arts center. So that you could begin to think about, okay, what activities relate to the story that we're telling that can extend the vocabulary, what can we do? And you can do this, you could actually do this whole thing for like a month if you really wanted to. Again, it depends on whether the children are interested, because sometimes children, children will come in and they're all into dinosaurs, right? And so you might decide from a kind of, okay, let's focus on dinosaurs, because that's what the children, so then I get a storybook about dinosaurs. And let's do dinosaurs for 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever, and see how we can extend that. Again, it depends on your curriculum and how you want to use it. The technique is applicable to whatever story that you want to use. So it doesn't have to be this story in particular, but this is a story that's illustrated in the handout for you. Oh, that is actually from, and you also have a handout that comes from the actual professional development training that we did. And this is what we gave out to the teachers that we were working with. So it gives you a lot of the background information about read alouds. This is from the Nuestros Niños, yeah. So I'm sharing that with you to give you some background information. And it tells you how to pick books and different genres of children's books and things like that. Okay. All right, I think, okay. So I'm going to end, and if this video doesn't work, that's okay. I'll turn it off. Okay, so I wanted to end with that video because it's just funny. Questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you for hanging in. I think there's an evaluation that you need to fill out. I don't have that evaluation form. Do you have it? You already have it? Okay, everything's, yeah. So thank you for hanging out with me. I know it was the very last session. But I appreciate it, and I'm wishing you the best with your work as you go forward with working with dual language learners. Thank you.